The boy band, a subgenre of pop music that, for decades and maybe even centuries, has held its own pocket of power in the music industry. Through sweet, sweet choreography and the dreamiest boys that Simon Cowell can cook up in a laboratory, boy bands have captured the hearts and minds of teenage girls and confused boys for as long as pop music has existed. Throughout the years, many a boy band have come and gone, and for some goddamn reason, come again, and year after year, generation after generation, they find an audience among the teenage girls of each generation. But why is that? Is it their charming good looks? Is it their jammin' tunes? Is it their glowing skin and dreamy eyes that melt you like a chocolate on a summer's day? This week, we'll be diving into the history of the boy band, going over a whole bunch of different boy bands spanning from all the way to the 60s to now, and getting to the bottom of why year after year, generation after generation, teenage girls fawn over these polo-wearing, skinny jean-wearing boys. So the first recorded boy band was actually in 1572 when William Shakespeare, Ludwig van Beethoven, Dick Van Dyke, and Paul Rudd, who's actually 500 years old, formed Ye Olde Singin' Boys with hits like Mo Bamba and F*** the Police. Now, I could go over more history behind that, but that isn't real. Seriously though, the history of boy bands actually dates back to the 1950s and 60s, with a little band you may know known as the Beatles. Now, you may be saying that the Beatles weren't actually a boy band, but if you look back, it was a group of 4 boys who made smash hit after smash hit, album after album, and they all played instruments. Now let me tell you something. How is that any different from what 5 Seconds of Summer has done? All those guys make hit after hit after hit, album after album after album, and they all play instruments too. Like, they're all boys, right? Like, what am I missing? What's the difference here? Anyway, the Beatles were the first boy band, but then when they broke up and, everybody died, there was a real dark time in the 80s where we didn't have any boy bands. But then, in the 90s, when we needed them most, the boy bands returned. See, in the 90s, we had a real era of popularity with boy bands, with bands like NSYNC and Backstreet Boys and Take That and 98 Degrees and Boys to Men, and that's basically it. I mean, that was it. All these boy bands were really like red hot, selling album after album, going off to tour after tour after tour, but then one by one, they all started to break up, with a lot of their guys going solo. Well, except Backstreet Boys, they kept staying together, but like, are boy bands that come back when they're older good unless they had a super long hiatus? See, that's better. So then moving into the 2000s, we get bands like the Jonas Brothers and Big Time Rush, who are technically boy bands, but really shifted the direction that the boy band music genre went into from like being bubblegum pop to really like a pop rock style music. And then, in the early 2010s, we got the boy band to inspire all boy bands. One Direction. See, where most boy bands were formed organically or like amongst friends or through mutual connections of performing and stuff, One Direction were actually created in test tubes by Simon Cowell in his attempt to create the perfect, quirky, rebellious, young, cute British boy band. And oh boy did it work. They took the world by storm, album after album, 5 years, 5 albums, 4 world tours, and 5 successful solo careers with absolutely no chance of getting back together again no matter how many times I dream about it at night. But off of their success came another really successful boy band, BTS, who I've never listened to once intentionally. Like, sometimes I hear their songs on the radio, but like I don't go out of my way to listen to them, and like I don't really get the whole K-pop thing as like a genre of music because like it's not really something that appeals to me. But I know that me saying this will make all of the BTS stans absolutely like spread my name negatively across all of the internet. And all I have to say about that is, here I am. I just don't listen to BTS. I got nothing against them. Don't kill me. So now that we've gone over the history of boy bands and some of the biggest boy bands of all time, we should probably go over what I think are the 3 main characteristics that all boy bands share, or most at least. Number 1, they all have a similar kind of poppy sound, even if they go in a different direction with like pop rock or something. Number 2, they all have some sort of choreography. Well, at least most of them. And number 3, they have really, really management. So with all these, we're going to do a deep dive into each aspect of these characteristics and really get to the bottom of why these boy bands keep succeeding. So with the vocals and the pop sound, a lot of boy bands rely on like 1 or 2 lead vocalists. So let's take NSYNC for example, right? You've got Justin Timberlake and JC Chasez, who had like the main vocals of the group, with Chris Kirkpatrick doing like the higher harmonizations, and Lance Bass, hilariously enough, doing the bass vocalizations, and Joey Fatone like doing things, I guess. I don't know, like, I guess he sang, but like I don't remember what he did with the harmonies, and like maybe he was just there for comic relief or like did something on the side for the business aspects of the band. Like I don't really get his shtick. Like he's funny, but like I don't get what he brought to the band. But hey, now he's got like a solo act at Disney or something, and Lance Bass has a podcast, and Chris Kirkpatrick is Chip Skylark. Wait, what the f? Chris Kirkpatrick is goddamn Chip Skylark? I didn't know that. That's so cool. So choreography in boy bands, by definition, is when the one lead vocalist is singing and the other band members are just sitting behind him dancing a bunch. Now we're going to take my current background dancers as examples behind me while I go off into this. See, boy bands in the 90s like NSYNC and Backstreet Boys had sweet choreography to go along with their awesome vocals, which made you really question how anyone had cardio endurance for this level of performance show after show, tour after tour. And after the 90s boy bands, choreography kind of died down, and like, let's just take One Direction for example, right? They kind of just ran around on stage, and Harry Styles fell on stage. A lot. Like way too much. But man, I'll tell you what, some of that choreography in the 90s was really, really nice, even if it didn't make sense for the song. I mean, like, maybe that's what Joey Fatone brought to NSYNC, because, like, he was such a good dancer. I mean, like, just look at those moves. God, what a hot guy. What? Am I not allowed to say that? Am I not allowed to say that? And finally, the one thing that most boy bands have the most in common. Awful management. So if you didn't know, at one point, NSYNC and Backstreet Boys were both managed by Lou Pearlman, who was basically the Dan Schneider of the 90s boy band era, in that he did a bunch of sketchy shit behind the scenes while managing some of the biggest names in the boy band industry. See, he eventually wound up in jail for like money laundering and conspiracy and like a whole bunch of other shit. And like, now he's dead. And I just, like, why couldn't the boy bands just like have no controversy? And then you've got One Direction, managed by the British equivalent of Dr. Evil, Simon Cowell. And there's a whole bunch of stories that came out of that band about mistreatment and overworking and like drug and alcohol abuse. I mean, they made 5 albums in 5 years, and they had 4 stadium tours in 4 years. I mean, like, that's just the definition of being overworked. And I mean, you can look at like a bunch of different interviews that Liam Payne has done about like drug and alcohol abuse among the band, but just like don't watch the Logan Paul interview. Like, whatever you do, don't watch the Logan Paul interview. And then we've got the worst manager / producer of them all, Big Time Rush's Gustavo Rock. I mean, there's nothing but horror stories about this manager. He constantly treated his band members poorly. He constantly called them dogs. He would show up randomly to their apartments and their homes, demanding they come to the studio. And anytime they made the smallest mistake possible, he would just scream and yell at them. Oh, it was a show. So unless you've been living under a rock the last couple of years, you, like me, know that the boy bands are back. Between the Jonas Brothers reuniting in 2019 and Big Time Rush reuniting in 2021, or 98 Degrees, I guess, or goddamn NSYNC reuniting after 20 years to make a new single for the Trolls movie, and showing up to the VMAs to present Taylor Swift with an award, and her, like, crying because she's seeing them all together, like, that was incredible. But anyway, boy bands are back in this new era, and their music when they've come back has been kind of like mid, if I'm being honest. Like, don't get me wrong, it's the type of music that I would expect from these bands to be making in this like time period, but I think that the charm is just worn off about these bands over time. And I just don't have that same like feeling that I had when I was a younger kid listening to like the Jonas Brothers as a child or NSYNC. That being said, I am going to see the Jonas Brothers on tour, so I guess I'm just another cog in the goddamn machine. But that's not the point. The point is my point still stands that a lot of the music has just been kind of meh. So how do we stop the boy band phenomenon? Well, I mean, like, to be honest, like, what's the big deal? Like, maybe I'm just on the opposite side of this, but like, I don't really get the problem with boy bands in the music industry. Like, if you don't want to listen to them, just like, don't listen to them. Because, like, the people who want to wipe away all boy bands from, like, the existence of music are dumb. Because, like, the Beatles were a boy band. And do you just want to, like, wipe away everything the Beatles have done from history? I mean, like, they made a movie about that. And it wasn't that great. Because, like, all I remember from that is Ed Sheeran and the main guy being in a singing competition or a songwriting competition or something. And Ed Sheeran wrote a song about, like, being a penguin. And he still lost the songwriting competition. Even though he's Ed Sheeran. To be honest, I actually have a confession to make. Even though I've been trashing boy bands and making fun of them this whole time, the reality of the situation is that I actually, absolutely, without a doubt, adore boy bands. I grew up with bands like NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, and when One Direction came around, I stayed up all night dancing to the best song ever. Now, that certainly doesn't mean I'm going to listen to BTS because all of that but I was one of those confused boys listening to that boy band music back in the day. But I was just confused musically. That's it. That's all it was. It was just musically. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed, consider leaving a like and subscribing for more weird videos from this pocket of my own brain. That's it for this week's Stop in the Knowledge Corner. I'll see you next week.